I know I had problems with my previous commentary on Sword Zenny, but I watched it again along with Josh Scorcher's Fame and Misfortune review of MLP and I still find it flawed. I recommend checking the links to these videos in the description below. Oh, and just in case if people get confused, 1 is Sword Zenny, 0 is Josh Scorcher. Let's begin.
To add to the surprise, Twilight suggests publishing the journal so that ponies all over Equestria can read about their adventures and learn from their mistakes as well. Now, this is a good idea on paper, allowing others to benefit from their mistakes. However, it takes away the trial and error aspect of relationships. Friendships aren't perfect because we aren't perfect, and having problems in our relationships help us grow as both friends and people. So, having what basically amounts to a cheat sheet for any problems that may come up may actually hinder a relationship because they never actually develop those problem-solving skills for themselves.
Not exactly. No one is saying the contents of the journal are mandatory. It's more like giving advice. And even then, the trial and error is still present regardless of whether you've taken advice related to the situation. Consider the following. Say you're getting bullied for the first time, and you are aware of the following options. Should you sort things out with words, ignore the bully, or do you require some assistance? There's a good chance there are more options I haven't listed, but the point is you can be well aware of those methods, yet you still won't know 100% of the time if they'll work.
There is only one problem with using the book as advice. The educational system can basically restrict it, only allow certain pages, or consider it mandatory. Consider the Bible is illegal to read in China. You could consider that countries consider what is and isn't acceptable in their country. I know that you might be speaking to those who might not need a lesson or advice, but as someone with autism, this is very necessary to them since they have little to no social skills.
We want to know why Fluttershy keeps learning the same thing over and over again. Be a student already!
Even I've learned more than she has. What can I be in a book?
You can see where the episode's going, can't you? This episode is one giant take that towards bronies, specifically the more critical side, with the journal representing the show and the townsfolk representing the fandom. We'll get to each individual point as they come, but for now, this question regarding Fluttershy's need to repeat a lesson is one that's been asked by a lot of fans over the years.
The episode's response?
Listen up! I am more suited. And yes, it took me a while to get there. But can you honestly say that you could learn something one time and completely change who you are? I didn't think so. That's
a very valid reason. That's very true to people in real life.
Kermit, what are you doing?
I'm dancing, bro!
I have to give the writers credit. They made me like Fluttershy a little bit more. As a person. As a character in a serialized episodic TV show, using the whole last verse same as the first storylines that they use for the majority of the main 6 is still pretty annoying.
No one in this episode acknowledged how this repetition is bad for a cartoon series or the book, just that there was repetition. In fact, the moral about being assertive is less copy-paste than you might think. Each episode starring Fluttershy have different forms of conflict, such as stage fright or being too assertive, along with different scenarios and methods to apply it. Not to mention, other characters often repeat their morals in the same way Fluttershy does, such as Applejack with family and honesty, Rainbow Dash with humility, etc. And that's ignoring how she does apply what she's learned in episodes like Dungeons and Discords, Flutterbriar, and Scaremaster.
This is the biggest problem to acknowledging your mistakes. They do not go away by just pointing them out. You need to address each individual and not as a whole. That's called straw manning. If you just focus on the argument and not their reasons for said argument, you end up making a flame war. Also, Josh just acknowledged the character development of Fluttershy in what you skipped.
Wow. You're way different from the Fluttershy in the book. I don't know how I feel about that.
So you come to complain about how flawed Fluttershy is in the book, then question the idea that she is different in person? This just goes to show that sometimes audiences don't really know what they want. Like the Zelda fandom.
I'm not sure why you didn't needed to put that in there and not acknowledge this. Either put it in there or don't bring it up. It makes you come off as dishonest. If you want to know why it's relevant, Fluttershy has been considered a cheesy quesadilla from the Taco Bell menu. An okay character, but the weakest. The writers try to put her in roles that would be good to add, but later take them out of the story. When they keep them in there, the development, it comes off as outdated later. There is a reason why restaurants add new things and wait for results. If it doesn't work out for some reason, then it gets removed. I'm not saying they should remove the character. I'm saying Fluttershy had the second smallest impact and should have had more material to help her character, while at the same time, changing the character to fit the character's struggles. Fluttershy could have an inspirational role for once not involving her development. Just saying that Fluttershy didn't have enough variety in her story.
So is Rarity Stress Toast, because apparently that's a thing. Applejack bursts into Rarity shop with an order for 100 blankets.
Not popular, Twilight. Not popular, and I don't like it one bit. They call themselves the Sweet Apple Admirers. They say they read my journal entries, and they felt like a part of the family.
I mean, this is more positive than the other experiences. You know, being laughed at, being attacked, being hounded by fans, being outright boycotted. I'd say troublesome squatters aren't really that bad considering, and I'm glad that these ponies are focusing on the good things about friendship. You know, like a closeness and how fulfilling friendship and family are.
Yeah, can I just point out how none of the admirers are doing any work? They're just helping themselves to anything that isn't nailed to the ground. If the admirers really did focus on the positive aspects of Applejack's journal entries, the apples should be the one relaxing. Work would be done much faster and everybody wins. But nope, these admirers are just wasted space, practically treating the Apple family like slaves.
You know, this could be an allegory of conventions in this scene. Considering that convention's only drama that gets addressed is the adult things. This is basically the problem with this. They don't address it. Though, Once Upon a Zeppelin does address this later. Granted, it's a bit tamed since this has to keep the Y7 rating. I think the only reason why he didn't bring this up is because of the time constraints. So I can't blame you for the response, but if you went to conventions, like summits, it could fail. Just a thought, isn't it ironic that there's no one questioning her position, decision, or thoughts? The same could possibly be said to Once Upon a Zeppelin.
So try tries to engage in household and civilized discussion. What I mean is, some ponies would argue that it doesn't seem believable that the six of you would be friends.
Believable?
Well, sure. I read this journal cover and I have to say your character would have been much more interesting if she stayed in Angela.
My character? We are real ponies. This journal is a record of things that actually happened to us.
Hasbro, are you under the delusion that your characters are real?
What? I'm about to have an existential crisis. When was the last time you heard me say cartoon?
I know you're trying to put forth the metaphor that the journal represents the show because a lot of what these detractors say are criticisms that the fandom has made, but newsflash, we're talking about fantasy pastel colored ponies having adventures in a magical land, not real people in the real world.
Just because there are cartoon characters, that doesn't mean they aren't real in the context of that cartoon. Yes, the residents can be seen as a metaphor for the MLP fanbase, but the townsfolk were arguing about how believable the stories were, and took things too seriously.
You might want to keep this in mind, because this is going to shoot him in the foot.
Allow us to prove this by addressing the complaints from the figurative fans that are conveniently in this one scene.
We made mistakes, and we learned from them.
What about Rarity? Were we really supposed to believe she learned anything she wrote in there?
Not really. Subjectivity is a thing. Even then, lots of people are capable of feeling and doing things you wouldn't expect them to do. Big Mac is a great example of this. He isn't the sort to run his mouth, but there are occasions where he'll say much more than yes or no.
The example you used doesn't work for Rarity since the fans were focusing on the beliefs of Rarity. You are basically tackling the argument with the wrong material. You should have tackled what were the criticisms were with Rarity they have a hard time believing. Otherwise, I could say without context that she was right all along because her friends were looking a gift horse in the mouth. Cherry picking is something that could happen is what I'm getting at.
That's why you gotta be Team Dash! She's the only one who didn't really need to learn anything because she was already so cool.
Let's see, enjoying something doesn't devalue you as a person, earning respect, good intentions can still have negative results. Should I go on?
Rainbow Dash episodes were criticized to basically say the way the writers were saying that she basically backpedaled her lessons. Examples, Mysterious Mare Duel and 28 Pranks Later. And the thing is that Hasbro didn't say why that was the case. So you're assuming that they are talking about in general and not particular parts.
Twilight was better before she got wings.
Not only is this subjective, but being a princess doesn't do anything to her character any more than it does her status or role in her world.
Once again, strawmanning as much as Hasbro and DHX. Twilight becoming a princess implied that she was becoming a Mary Sue at first, didn't deserve the title as princess second, and she hasn't done princess duties third. The biggest problem, however, is they jumped the shark. If you think this is an assumption, wait until my thoughts, cause this will surprise you.
The metaphor doesn't work if you use it like that. I mean, it could work if you were telling us that there are real people behind artistic creations, so being harshly critical and rude to these people is wrong. And that's a totally fair message.
It says the metaphor wouldn't work the way it did in the show. It says it could work the way it did in the show. Huh? Even your suggestion for how it could work sounds confusing, because you say the episode should show there are real people behind an artistic creation, and being mean to them is wrong, but what's the main conflict here? The main characters are being scrutinized because of something they— Hang on, Zenny. He was about to say the townsfolk in the show were extremely negative and had next to no variation, the exception being the two fillies introduced at the start of the episode. Well, that doesn't excuse the poor wording before that. as he is excusing the episode of something it isn't guilty of.
I will admit that this wasn't worded properly, but he has a point. They should have translated that better. If I were the writers, I would have them say they were written by us and our experience and leave out the real part. Make it look like they are looking at the audience. I'll be skipping his accusation since it has no relevance.
Another thing that rubs me the wrong way is that the show seems to be trying to place itself on a pedestal, like saying it's above criticism.
Yeah, but the purpose of the journal isn't supposed to be marketing.
Really?
Well, what if it wasn't meant to be compared to Hasbro in general? The company that owns MLP may be focused on cash, but the writers of the show can still have differing viewpoints. Because the main six don't act as a hive mind or have any corporate motives, it seems more likely the comparison is with the staff, not the company.
Didn't Hasbro tell Dave to write it their way? Yeah, it might sound like DHX, but if Hasbro told them to write it this way, wouldn't you find it fishy that Dave wrote this with Hasbro's authority to change it? No one ever listens to both sides of the story sometimes. Sounds can be deceiving, you know. I'll explain in my final thoughts. Skipping the addressing flaw argument since I would be recapitulating.
Oh, and if you thought that was rock bottom, check this out. It's shown later in the episode that the only two ponies who get it are the children, who are colored like previous generation MLP ponies.
Though it might seem that way, the reason only those two were brought in was because Starlight was looking for those two specifically. There could have been some ponies in the mob that were enlightened by what Twilight had to say, but couldn't stand up for her and her friends because of those who were still bickering. Heck, there could have been others that share the same thought as those two fillies long before the journal went public, but were either too far away or didn't interact with the main six enough to be noticed. It's even more fitting in the episode for those specific fillies to be chosen. They were shown multiple times fighting, both of which Twilight intervened, and haven't been fighting ever since Twilight gave them a copy of the journal. There is a clear contrast between the kids and the mob, but you're focusing on the negative interpretations instead of giving both sides a fair fight.
If there's one thing I can add to Josh's argument, why not go with different colors? Colors that don't come off as G3. Rainbow Dash was Lauren Faust's idea of mixing Firefly from G1 and Rainbow Dash from G3, but they used different colors to make it come off as not too similar. Considering Hasbro didn't tell Dave to do this is implying they have other plans. So your marketing counter-argument doesn't work if there's something addressed in the review. Coincidence? Maybe. But I imagine the fillies had to pay for the book or are just being used by Hasbro to promote their toys. Final thoughts. While you could say it's bad by just taking it piece by piece, it shows three possibilities. A. You didn't pay attention. B. You forgot to address them. Or C. You misconstrued his words to make yourself look like the smart guy. What do I mean? Let's take a look at the rest you skipped.
What I mean is, some ponies would argue that it doesn't seem believable that the six of you would be friends.
Believable?
Well, sure. I read this journal cover to cover, and I have to say, your character would have been much more interesting if she'd stayed in Canterlot.
My character? We are real ponies. This journal is a record of things that actually happened to us.
Hasbro? Are you under the delusion that your characters are real? I know you're trying to put forth the metaphor that the journal represents the show because a lot of what these detractors say are criticisms that the fandom has made, but newsflash, we're talking about fantasy pastel colored ponies having adventures in a magical land, not real people in the real world.
I'm curious, how comfortable is your head,
Hasbro,
when it's shoved so far up your own ass?
The metaphor doesn't work if you use it like that. I mean, it could work if you were telling us that there are real people behind artistic creations, so being harshly critical and rude to these people is wrong. And that's a totally fair message. We on the internet tend to treat people as the devil for an honest mistake or a faux pas. We need to be careful when calling out individuals for criticism because, believe it or not, there's a real person on the other side. Oh wait. That's the episode that M.A. Larson wanted to write, and you didn't let him!
There's somebody else on the other side of these things you're tweeting or Facebooking or whatever it is. And I thought there was a really relevant message for kids, and really sweet, and had the heart of the show. And everybody was like, no, that's not what we're doing. We're doing the one where they're assholes.
Okay, to be fair, I do understand why they wanted to make this episode. We do have quite a few entitled brats in this fandom who are very cruel to the show staff. I remember when someone publicly harassed Dave Polsky at a convention Q&A session. And let's not forget the meltdown people had with Alicorn Twilight. I know we like to think that the brony fandom is some sort of exception to the rule, a great bastion of friendship and love, but it's filled with people who are imperfect. Sure, the majority are pretty decent people, but on the other hand, we get entitled, we get defensive and critical, and like the townsfolk here, we don't always share our opinions very tactfully. We are human, no denying that, but the problem I have is what the episode appears to be blaming here. It's putting all of the fault squarely on the fans.
It's not your fault. It's every pony else's. They're just focusing on the wrong things.
Okay, that excuse doesn't fly. Publishing the journal was a good idea on paper, and I agree that everyone is focusing on the wrong things. The journal was meant to help friendship not turn into this fustercluck. But here's the thing, outside of fascism, you can't control what others think. People are going to draw whatever conclusions they want, and when you put yourself out there to the public, that's the risk you take. And yes, fans may be imperfect, but guess what? The people who make the things in the first place are equally as flawed. Communication is a two-way street, and I'm going against a point I made in an earlier video because real life has shown me otherwise. If you say something and it can be taken two ways and one of them makes the other person sad or angry, it doesn't matter if you meant it the other way. The intent is always nice, but we all need to be careful what we say and be as clear as possible, especially if your voice has a widespread influence. I still stand by my opinion on Feeling Pinky Keen. I liked this episode, and I personally thought it had a great message. Try to understand, but if you can't, learn to be okay with that. That was because the episode itself didn't communicate its message in a way so that everyone could understand. Now, sometimes people are deliberately missing the point, and by all means call them out when it happens, but more often than not, it's the fault of the communicator.
Our point was just misunderstood.
Ah, but since it's your show, that's on you. You should have been clearer.
If that many people misread our argument, that means we should have done a better job explaining it. Doing nuance on TV is hard, but that's my job, so in the future, I'll try to be better.
Another thing that rubs me the wrong way is that the show seems to be trying to place itself on a pedestal, like saying it's above criticism.
Yeah, but the purpose of the journal isn't supposed to be marketing.
Really? And this is where the journal as representative of the show metaphor falls apart. Yes, I can agree that the journal wasn't supposed to be about marketing, but if you expect me to believe that this show wasn't created to help sell toys, then I think you need to get out of the cactus juice. We're not idiots. We can tell when certain plot elements are added to the show for the sake of selling toys or just marketing stunts. Just look at Equestria Girls for Pete's sake. So then we get a musical number about treating people kindly despite their faults. Great message, guys. Seriously. But I do have to ask this question, though. Who is this moral for? Seriously, who are you talking to with this? The detractors? No one in the fandom is under the delusion that these characters actually exist. To remind the main six that they're imperfect? They already know that. The kiddies at home to show them that they are imperfect and still have things that they need to work on? Well, yeah, that's an excellent moral. But the message of the song and the plot of the episode aren't congruent. How are they supposed to learn the moral when you don't set up a scenario where it actually applies? It would have been better had this just been a standalone song or had it been in a different episode, honestly. It also doesn't help that after the song is done, everyone continues to bicker, showing that everyone who criticizes the show is unreasonable. Yeah, screw that noise. Now, maybe this episode isn't trying to say that, but that's what it's coming off as, at least to me, and that only goes back to what I was saying earlier about misconstrued messages. Oh, and if you thought that was rock bottom, check this out. It's shown later in the episode that the only two ponies who get it are the children, who are colored like previous generation MLP ponies. Now, they probably didn't mean it this way, but that seems to be saying that the only people who are allowed to enjoy the show are the children. Like, it's not for us, so we can't criticize it. Okay, ignoring the fact that you are never entitled to only receive good comments, you still make reference to things like the Communist Manifesto that would fly over the heads of younger people, so you clearly recognize the adult audience. You should never tell someone that they can't have an opinion. You could tell them to present it more courteously, or you could tell them that they're missing crucial information, but to deny someone their own thoughts is disrespectful and dehumanizing.
And this is why you never cut out context to what they're getting at. It becomes a strawman fallacy and later a flame war. The Powerpuff Girls episode Girls Gone Mild proves this. They say it's inappropriate for children but don't say how. For fame and misfortune, they do address it, but don't cover it enough. And Dave Polsky's writing got denied because of marketing and not because they are doing this for DHX. Hasbro may think it's worth it, but they think it's worth it in green. You could make the argument it shouldn't be compared to Hasbro, but if that's the case, then Dave should focus on this outside of Hasbro and not inside. Yeah, I might be saying this as a negative to Dave, but he has every right to change plans. If Dave ever finds a way of getting to this, then he has hope. What I'm saying is you never want to shut someone out because it'll give you money, you want to give a heartfelt message. Otherwise, you come off as that one guy that kicks puppies. Sword, if you were trying to gain fame for the wrong reason, then it is possible that one dislike is because you are in no position to talk. I at least paid attention to what Josh said, though, I'm not going to hold on to it until you at least explain yourself. For me, I basically rushed it previously. If it's the same reason, then we can both learn something about ourselves. Like, comment, share the video, subscribe, and click on the bell to get notified for more of my work. Share your ideas and thoughts with me.